Hello and welcome to the Spooky Chris podcast. I am Spooky Chris, which would mean I am Chris Ringler, author, occasional filmmaker, podcaster, and all-around odd guy living in mid-Michigan. This is near episode 50, which is amazing and strange because it took me a year to get this far, but also crazy to think because I started this podcast on a lark when I found myself unemployed and didn't have a lot to do. So I thought I would kind of turn my frown upside down and make stew out of poo. And it's been kind of fun. I don't know that anyone listens. Let's say for one or two friends that are just very, very kind people. But it's been very cool doing these, and this time around I thought I would talk about my little book series I wrote. I don't recall ever talking about those in length. So once upon a time I worked at a vitamin store, which was very funny and still is funny because I am not the healthiest lad, and I'm certainly not someone who puts a whole lot of time and effort into vitamins. I frankly needed a job. It was one of those where I needed a job, and it was an available job, and I got the job. It was just being a clerk at the front desk kind of deal, which is always funny. You know, you think like how job interviews are always like, why would you want this job? And let's face it, most times the answer is because I need money and need a job. You can't say that because honesty isn't always the best policy when it comes to that. But that was the case. So I started working there. And while working there, I did a lot of... I seem to have a habit of writing at all my jobs. But I would read a lot and write there. And I worked with this great guy named Ash. And it turns out it's fitting that I'm doing this today because today is the 1-year anniversary of his death. And so I don't know, that seems fitting because he had a hand in my little book series. So I worked with this guy Ash, who was just this great guy. He was a man of faith. I am an atheist. So we would have these theological discussions, and we'd talk about the world and all manner of things. And in talking, I don't know where the initial thought came up. I just can't think for the life of me. It was a long time ago. This would have been early 2000s. So, gosh, 18-ish years ago, something like that. A little later. Maybe 16. But still, it was a while ago. And so out of the blue, I started talking about and thinking about bumble kitties. And bumble kitties were these strange little creatures that were basically cats, maybe just a little bigger than a kitten, but plump, with bee wings. And bumble kitties would buzz as they flew around. And I would always talk about, I'd talk about bumble kitties to Ash, and we would talk about all of that. And that was kind of the beginning, where everything started from bumble kitties. And so time goes on. I meet another friend, and she and I become good friends. And in the course of our friendship, I think of connectors to these Meep sheep, or see these bumble kitties called Meep sheep. My friend at the time was a model who went by the name Messy. And so I loved the alliteration of Messy and the Meep sheep. And so Meep sheep, to me, were these kind of smaller sheep that had wings. And again, like initially I thought bumblebee wings. I can't remember how I've changed it because bumble kitties and Meep sheep have different style wings now, and it's been long enough that I've written it, I can't think of the style, and shame on me. I've written so much stuff, it kind of passes underneath the bridge, and I just can't think of it. But they have a different style. I always draw them with bumblebee wings. So bumble kitties may have like dragonfly wings or something. I'm not sure. But Meep sheeps would. So they would find you whenever you were sad, and they nudge your arm, kind of like a dog or a cat. I mean, either one. When they want attention, they kind of nudge underneath your arm, so that you kind of have to put your arm around them. And then when you squeeze them, they will kind of make you smile. It's very silly, very strange. And they say Meep when you squeeze them, and they make you happy. So I met these two great people, these two very wonderful friends, and I had this little world. So I started writing stories about Messy and the Meep sheep. So the way it worked was, and it's funny because it was back when I didn't write novels. It was almost a source of pride. I don't write novels. I write short stories. And so I started writing these short stories about this young woman who was essentially a princess, and her mother a queen, and a powerful wielder of magic. I don't know if I'd call her a witch or what. She's a mistress of magic is what I called her. And so the story was about this young girl, late teens girl, probably 20-ish, who was next in line to take over as queen of this land, the land of man. And she had no interest in it. She had no interest in leading. She had no interest in any of that. She wanted to be an artist. And she had been raised doing art, and that was where her passion lay. And that was what she wanted, was to be an artist more than anything. But her mother, who wouldn't tell her what way to go, was just very insistent. Like, this is kind of what you're expected to be. This is who you are. And so the thing that the Mistress of Magic would do is the land that they lived in was forever covered over in clouds, and the Mistress of Magic would kind of push back the clouds from time to time to make sure that their people would see the sun and remember, joy. And so the first book, The Meep Sheep, is about this young woman on her quest trying to find out who she is and what she wants to do. And on that journey, she discovers that she can create these things that she dubs Meep Sheep. She creates them by painting them. And, she makes them, when they find people when they're sad, they have you give them a squeeze, and that's how she brings light back into the world for these people. And one of the characters is Ashley Pickles, who guards the border to an area called the Great Thicket, where it's this wild land, where kind of all of life kind of stemmed from in that region, but it's a dangerous place that no one goes, and he guards it. And there's bumble kitties and blue moos, which are flying cows. I guess everything has to fly in my little world. They're hovering cows, and he guards it. So the book is about these people as they come together and try to find their own light, and find the will and the passion and strength to stop a witch. And it's funny because I get it. I know a lot of people who are Wiccan and witches, and I get the negative connotation, and you try not to get into stereotypes, and witches are bad, and I get it. But these are fairy tales. I wrote a trilogy of fairy tales. Fairy tales have witches, I'm sorry. So in mine, there is this evil witch who she just wants darkness. She wants to spread darkness. That's all she lives for. So the whole book is about this, tug of war between light and dark, and between destiny and choice. And I wrote it, and I loved it, and I still love it. I think it's a fun book. It's not anything like I wrote before then. I never had an interest in writing anything that wasn't horror or creepy or weird. So it's still weird and creepy and scary, but there's joy to it. There is imagination and magic, and it gave me a chance to kind of think back to being a kid and to tap into all of the fairy tales I read and those worlds and the magic of that time. More than anything else, I was trying to kind of tap into an innocence I hadn't had in my writing in a long time. And I think, I think I did it. I love that book. It's a novel of short stories. I've done that before, which is my way of cheating the system and kind of, doing a novel, but it's comprised of these stories. So I did it, wrote it, happy as a clam, moved on, and wrote other books, did other stuff. Except I had more ideas in my head for other stories and other little characters, and it occurred to me that maybe there was more to say. So at the time, Tumblr was taking off. Tumblr has kind of waned, but it was microblogging, so it was short form blogging. It became kind of just reposting stuff, which was a drag, and I just kind of passed, kind of let it go. One of the reasons, honestly, is they started cracking down on what was allowable content on there, and I'm just not the biggest fan of that. For a platform that is about free expression. But I tapped out eventually, so I decided I'm going to write these. I'm going to start a Tumblr to tell other stories about the land of man and to tell other kind of more of the history. And that's what it started as. I started writing the history of that land and kind of the background and like the other fables and fairy tales of that land. And they're all history until you get to the end. So I started doing it that way. And I realized after I wrote a few of them, I'm like, this is pretty cool. I actually like this. And I decided to put it together as a book that served as prequel and sequel both. And I decided to call it The Creep Sheep, because there is a new creature in it called the Creep Sheep, and they're the opposite of the Meep Sheep in that they have bat's wings and they're gray and they have ram's horns, and they bring depression and misery with them. They are the antithesis of the Meep Sheep. And I thought that was such a fun idea and a fun character, and like I say, it serves as part of it serves as kind of an explanation of what made that land what it is, and a sequel to the first book. It's a slimmer book than the first, but it gave me as much joy writing it. Again, these were fun to write. These weren't like anything else, but these stories were darker in nature than the initial Meep Sheep book, and that's just the stories I had to tell at the time. They were just darker. So I did that, and eventually in time. So in 2009, I discovered the wonders of self-publishing and CreateSpace through Amazon, and started putting books out. And Meep Sheep was in the first few books I put out, and then Creep Sheep came a little bit later. And so put Creep Sheep out, moved on, put out my zombie book and my big novel and all this other stuff that I'd been working on. Only I wasn't done. So when I wrote my novel, A Shadow Over Ever, a long time ago, So I wrote, again, it started as a novel of short stories. And so I did it. The first part was about a guy who goes crazy, and puts a pumpkin on his head and kills the town and goes crazy, and I called it Night's Dancer. And it was the silliest little, like, my idea was like this hillbilly in overalls and a pumpkin head dancing in the night as he's hanged, because he gets stuff wrapped around his head and he's kind of dancing. So I wrote that, and then decided there was more to say, and then I, wrote a second part, and then eventually like a third part, and then was like, well, I can't leave it at a cliffhanger, because at the end of the third part, it's the beginning of a war, and I guess, like, I can't leave it at a cliffhanger, so I finally finished the last story, as it were, and then put the whole thing together. I felt the same about the Meep Sheep. It's like I'd created this, I kind of expanded it, and I kind of left the door open just enough that it felt like it needed resolution. And so the last book is the biggest of the three, and it's the darkest for sure. They kind of age up, and to me these are all aged books, like the Meep Sheep Trilogy. But I mean, it does get darker. The last book is called The Last Sheep. It was going to be called The Last War, but The Last Sheep seemed fitting for a lot of reasons. And again, this is about legacy and destiny, and whether we choose either of those. It's about kind of where everything goes. I apologize for vagaries. I hate to give anything away for anyone who may want to read these. I love all three books. I love that my wife is in them now as a character of sorts. Her dog, who has passed, is in it of sorts. I love that people that I love are connected to these, so that they, in some small way, they live forever. I love that. I love that my friend Ash will live forever as Ashley Pickles, and I think that's great. I think these are pretty great little books. I may be the only one that thinks that, but I think they're fantasy books that aren't like what other people are doing or did. These aren't sword and sorcerer books. These aren't dragon books. These are simple stories about people trying to find magic in themselves, to find joy, to find connection, to find love. There's a lot of love in these books. There's a lot of, like I say, trying to find yourself, trying to connect to your parents. And I think they're kind of special books. And again, it's easy for me to say that because I wrote them. So go fig that I'm like, oh, they're great. But I just think that there's something that's not out there. It fits a niche that people haven't filled, where it's cute but it's dark. It says a lot. It says a lot about, finding yourself, taking chances, a love of art. There's a lot in there, and I think it's some of the purest stuff I've written, for sure. Like, I love, what I write, but I think it's definitely the purest stuff, where there's no age in mind. I'm just telling stories, but didn't feel the need to, like, put an excessive violence or, cursing or anything, because that's not what the story called for. And I think at the end, seeds that I planted earlier really come to fruition, and I think it's a cool resolution for that everything. But yeah, so I wrote these little things called the Meep Sheep books, the Meep Sheep, the Creep Sheep, and the Last Sheep, and I put them all out, and then they led to me kind of doing kids books eventually. But I think there's something special, and like I say, they're not like anything else out there. I mean, everybody says that, and I'm sure if I looked, somebody has similar stuff. But I hadn't seen anything like that. And it's so different to everything else I write. I appreciated that. But yeah, you can find them on Amazon.com. I'm sure if you are an indie book person, they can probably be ordered through any indie place. You can find out more information about them at my website, spookychris.com, where all of my podcasts and everything else are found. But check them out. You can find more about them, like I say, online, and I think they're pretty neat. I think they're neat books if you're into those kind of dark fantasies. And see what you think. Hopefully you are well, my friend, during this time of pandemic. And I will talk to you sooner than later. Take care.